It was a wild roller coaster of a week for Trump's thoughts on presidential authority. First, he said he had the power to reopen states, and that changed by the next day.
The President of the United States calls the shots. It's a decision for the President of the United States. They can't do anything without the approval of the President of the United States. When somebody's the President of the United States, the authority is total. And that's the way it's got to be. The governors are going to be opening up their states. They're going to declare when. It's going to be up to the governors. I think you're going to see quite a few states starting to open. The governors are responsible for testing.
Let's bring in McKay Coppins, staff writer at The Atlantic and author of The Wilderness, Deep Inside the Republican Party's Combative, Contentious, Chaotic Quest to Take Back the White House. Elizabeth Goitein, co-director of the Liberty and National Security Program at Brennan Center for Justice. And Alexis Coe, author of You Never Forget Your First, a biography of George Washington. Kimberly Atkins, MSNBC contributor and senior Washington news correspondent at Boston NPR station. All right, McKay, I want to start with you. Who told the president that what he said on Monday wasn't the case?
Well, I think that it was clear that there was some amount of pushback, not just from people inside the administration, but also from Republican governors. This is, his whole line of argument here kind of flew in the face of conservative orthodoxy, which has up until pretty recently been founded on this idea of federalism. And so he retreated from it fairly quickly while still trying to save face in somewhat, Trumpian fashion.
Kimberly, you saw those tweets, liberate Minnesota, liberate Michigan. What do you make of those?
Well, look, I think on the surface, it shows the president's instinct, which he wants the country to be reopened as quickly as possible. And that's what led to that initial declaration that was not just against conservative orthodoxy, as McKay says correctly, but also against the Constitution, the 10th Amendment, that he is in total control and that his authority is absolute. But he wants to have the authority to order or at least pressure these governors to move to reopen the country. And that was part of it. Of course, those tweets come at a time where they were protesting, some of those protesters displaying some really awful signs and really encouraging the worst among the public. But the vast majority of the public, it's important to say, seems to be behind these restrictions, and they want to get past this as best as they can. If staying home is part of that, there's broad support for that.
Elizabeth, Monday, Trump said that multiple provisions in the Constitution give him authority. We know that isn't true. What power does the president have in this scenario?
Well, Congress has quite a bit of power over interstate commerce, and to the effect that that some of the actions that states have taken would certainly have an effect on interstate commerce. So, for example, restrictions or burdens placed on people coming into a state from other states. That is something that Congress would absolutely have the ability to change through legislation. But that's Congress. And the president does not have any inherent authority under the Constitution over public health and over public health crises. That's a point he doesn't quite seem to understand. So unless Congress has acted to delegate powers to him over this, this is not a war. This is not terrorism. This is not a situation where, as the commander in chief of the armed forces, he has some kind of inherent powers under the Constitution. So he's really wrong on two counts here, both because the states do have more power than the federal government over public health and public safety. And second, to the extent that the federal government does have some authority where it affects interstate matters, it's Congress, not the president, that has that power.
Alexis, our resident historian, I wonder how you make sense of these powers in a historical context.
Strong hold on the Constitution. He doesn't understand that executive overreach in American history has almost always been an embarrassment and a huge mistake for the president. In 1950s, we see Truman trying to seize steel factories because he wants to avoid a strike, and the Supreme Court rejected his justification that he had inherent powers. George Washington, when he tried to collect taxes, tried to squash a whiskey rebellion, as it was called, and it was a rebellion that wasn't. The government got a judicial writ, rode out, and found that there was absolutely nobody protesting, literally an empty field. So it is, it just doesn't work out very well.
McKay, in your article this week, you say Trump is casting himself as a pandemic prophet. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's so fascinating. You know, it was only 6 weeks ago or so that the president was standing before a crowd of supporters in South Carolina telling them that all the stuff they were hearing about the coronavirus was a hoax, that it was all hype by Democrats and the media was in hysteria mode. Now, 6 weeks later, reality has asserted itself. We're in the situation we're in. And he's pushing a new narrative, and his conservative media allies are going along with it, that he was actually ahead of the curve because he implemented these travel restrictions in late January. And now, there, you know, we can go into the weeds on what that actually entailed and how the time that preceded that was squandered. But what we do know is that this president, compared even to other Republican politicians, let alone the media and other Democrats, was not ahead of the curve on this. He, in fact, spent the several weeks leading up to a serious outbreak in the U.S. saying that this was not going to be serious. But he's placed a bet that he can convince his supporters and at least enough Americans to win re-election that he was on top of this. He was always taking it seriously, and that's the message he's decided to go with.
Elizabeth, Trump also pushed the idea that he was going to use his power to adjourn Congress so that he could make recess appointments. Can you just talk us through that?
Yes. Once again, this is a president. This is a power that the president is claiming to have that he simply doesn't have. The Constitution allows the president to adjourn Congress in situations, and only in situations, where the two chambers of Congress cannot agree on a date to adjourn. It's actually meant to be a limitation on the president's powers so that the president can't just adjourn Congress whenever he wants. He can only do it in that situation. And there's not even a pretext that that's happening here. I mean, there has been a date that's been agreed to by both houses for adjournment. It's January 3rd, 2021. So there is absolutely no authority in the Constitution, and the president isn't even trying to pretend that there's some disagreement between the chambers here. He is just sort of boldly asserting this authority to misuse one of the powers in the Constitution. And honestly, that's one of the scariest things about it, even if he doesn't even attempt to follow through.
Kimberly, I wonder how you make sense of these shocking statements, multiple statements in a week, and where they fit into this moment that we're in.
Yeah, you know, it really shows that the president is viewing this from the lens that he views most things, which is that he conflates the office of the presidency with himself. He conflates the things that he wants as being necessarily the right thing for the country. And then you have this juxtaposition of governors, local officials, public health officials telling the president exactly what they need. They're telling them that they need more access to testing, that they don't have it, despite claims by the White House that there is sufficient testing equipment to go around. People on the ground are saying that it's not. They want a clear, cohesive strategy that allows them to work together. You've seen governors taking it upon themselves to form their own regional coalitions to work together to make sure that they don't start unexpected spreads in other places while they themselves are trying to bring their states back online and their economies back online. You see people who are asking for guidance for the White House, but the White House at this point isn't willing to give it. It's more waiting to blame states and local officials if things go wrong.
All right, McKay, Liza, Alexis, and Kimberly, thank you all so much.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.